Welcome to week 2 of your 12-week home study package. And this week we're going to devote ourselves to changing chaos to cosmos to cash. So we're going to go from chaos to cosmos, which is something more organized, and from that to cash. I want to remind you again, and we'll remind you probably almost every day, to make sure that you've written your 3 pages and make sure that you've done your AT twice. Our goals this week are to understand the science of chaos better, to understand the 3 principles underlying the science of chaos, to understand how chaos creates from nothing. And we'll talk about that in day 2, but today what we want to do in day 1 is to look at the science of chaos. Remember that the science of chaos is primarily aimed at the natural phenomena. It's aimed at turbulence and living systems, and that makes it perfect for analysis of the market. Chaos itself is a very different way of looking at anything, at the world. It's saying that the things that the early classical scientists classified as measurement error were actually the things that are underpinning science and underpinning the way the universe works. Also, we will learn that the way the universe works, the way the market works, and the way you and I work are all on the same basis. That the things that we have assumed for so long, for example, we assumed that you're over there and you're looking at this videotape and there's nothing but space in between. We now know that there's a lot of things going on in that space, and quantum scientists call that space the quantum soup. And in the science of chaos gives us 3 principles. The first principle is that basically, and this is an assumption, that everything in the universe is energy. Remember last week we said that Einstein took away the mass, energy, space, and time, and he said that there's only 2 things in the universe. There is nothingness, and there is condensed nothingness, things that we call form. So we ourselves, our body and the market and everything else, is really only condensed nothingness. What quantum physicists say is that that's comes out of the quantum soup. But they all agree that everything in the universe basically is energy. And energy, which means everything in the universe, always follows the path of least resistance. So the reason that you're watching this at this particular moment is because with everything else going on in your life and with your ambitions and your obligations, this was the path of least resistance. And energy always follows that path of least resistance. The market does the same thing. The market follows the path of least resistance. So if there's more buying pressure than selling pressure, the market goes up. Vice versa, if there's more selling pressure than buying pressure, the market then goes down. So the first principle of chaos is that everything in the universe follows the path of least resistance. The second principle is that this path of least resistance is determined, and this is very important, by the always underlying and the usually unseen structure. That means that what we see with our eyes, the visual part of our life, always has an underlying structure. For example, if you have a stream going down the mountain, the riverbed, the underlying structure, determines the behavior of that stream. So if that stream is broad and wide, it's going to go slow, and it's going to be a calm, smooth pond. If that underlying structure, the riverbed, happens to be narrow and shallow, then it's going to create rapids. So as we go down this, rafting down this whitewater river, it looks as if, and it appears that the water is making its own decision. It isn't. The market is responding to gravity and to the riverbed, the shape of the riverbed. And it is simply following the path of least resistance. So again, first principle, everything follows the path of least resistance, including you and I in the market. So if we get together with the market, then winning becomes the path of least resistance. Second principle is that this path of least resistance is determined by the always underlying and the usually unseen structure. Then the third principle, which is kind of our savior here, is that this unseen, unnoticed underlying structure can be discovered and it can be changed. So that's what we're all about. That's what this entire program is about. Finding out what the underlying structure of the market is, finding out what our own personal underlying structure is, and then getting them into alignment, and then winning will be as easy as rolling downhill. because the market, you, I, the universe, everything always follows the path of least resistance. So reviewing real quickly these three principles, because they're very important. And I know that you want to get into trading, and we're going to do that next week. But it's very important to spend these first 2 weeks making sure we understand the underlying philosophy of our approach. And our underlying philosophy is the science of chaos. Chaos has three principles, repeating again for emphasis, that everything follows the path of least resistance. This path of least resistance is determined by the always underlying, usually unseen structure, and that unseen underlying structure can be changed, it can be discovered, and it can then be changed. So let's review this first day of the second week. We're not covering a great deal of ground because we want to make sure that you understand these principles, these three principles of chaos, that everything always follows the path of least resistance. That's determined by the underlying structure, and that underlying structure can be discovered and it can be changed. Now, it's very important that you have taken, in review, it's very important that you have taken your IT, your InterTrader, on a date last weekend or over the weekend. It's also very important that you've written your 3 morning pages and you've done your AT twice. Tomorrow, we're going to get into the most important day, in my opinion, of this entire course, of the entire 12 weeks, and probably the most important thing we could get into in your entire life. So get a good night's sleep, get up in the morning, write your 3 morning pages, get everything out of your left hemisphere and your mind, do the AT, and then come back and we'll look at day 2, week 2. Well, here we are, week 2, day 2, and remember yesterday we said this is probably, at least in my opinion, the most important day of the entire program. And I'm sure that you did your 3 morning pages today and you've done your AT twice. Today what we're going to look at is the science of chaos. And chaos does not mean chaos. Actually, a better definition of chaos is new information. So anytime you hear the word chaos from now, just think about new information, because that's really what it is. Now, the big question then becomes, and this is the most important part of the whole course, what do you do with new information? Think about that for a moment. What do you do with new information? Well, the first thing most people do is they try to organize it in some way. So if I tell you something that you don't quite understand, you may come back to me, well, Bill, is it like so-and-so? Or that reminds me of something. And we try to organize it by fitting it into, and listen very carefully, old categories. Old categories are the same thing as belief systems. So we have an obligation. We're taught this all the way through school, from kindergarten on up through graduate school. We're taught to fit new information into old categories. The only problem with that is this. Whenever you fit it into old categories, you have to distort it, you have to massage it so it somehow fits. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say that, well, let me give you a personal example. The first date I ever had, I was a junior in high school. And I dated this girl. It was my first date. I was very frightened. I got my older sister and a couple of older cousins trying to teach me how to dance real quick. And I went on this date, and this happened to be a red-headed girl. I thought she was probably one of the most beautiful girls in high school at the time. And it was a tragic experience. I mean, it was a very tragic experience for me. It was so upsetting that it took me an entire year before I would ask another girl for a date. And to this day, today, if I see an attractive red-headed female, I feel my whole body kind of crunch up because of that. Now, that happens because that happened to come at a very emotional time. It was my first date, all the excitement and everything else going around. We all have these categories. For example, let me give you another example. Let's say that you're a small 2-foot-high human being, and you want to explore your world, and you had just learned to walk, and you want to touch the hot stove, and you want to go outside and walk in the street, and this big person that you later learned to call Mummy tells you you can't do it. You don't like that. So what you do is you bite her on the calf, and then she maybe slaps you on the bottom or does something, and you decide that that's not the way you want to organize your life. So you create a category. You create a belief system that for me to get along in this life, I better be compliant. I better do what people say. I better be a good person. And so I grow up and I go to school and I am a quote unquote good person. I sit near the back of the room. I never cause any problems. When the parents come to the PTA meeting, the teachers brag about how I never cause problems. And I always am there and do my work and very conscientious and never disturb anything. And I do this all the way through school and I end up a serial killer. That's where all serial killers come from, because they cannot organize the new incoming information and it doesn't square with what they feel inside. So we organize new information most of the time, and we're taught how to do this, by putting it into old categories. The other day we were talking about what happens in the world, and we were having kind of a group discussion among the staff here at the Profitunities Trading Center, and we decided that the 4 biggest money movers, and one way of looking at economics is that it basically just moves money around. There are 4 big money movers that are larger than any country in the world, larger than the United States or any superpower that's ever been. Those 4 things are war, medicine, insurance, and one other. And guess what it is? We've got war, insurance, medicine, and the one other is religion. Now think about those 4 things. They all have one thing in common. And that one thing in common has to do with organization. Now when new incoming information comes in, we want to organize it. We've attempted to organize this program so it makes sense to you. If you're taking notes on this program, you're trying to organize it. One of the things that happens when you organize anything is it takes on a life of its own. And when it takes on a life of its own, its primary goal, the most important goal in the world, is survival. Now we've been going through several years now of bashing the IRS here in the United States. We're saying that we're going to do away with the IRS, we're going to report our taxes on a postcard, but think of what that means. That means that hundreds of thousands of IRS employees are going to be out of work, plus a lot of CPAs, plus a lot of tax attorneys. And in my own personal opinion is that there's probably going to be blood in the streets, because before that happens, because every organization, no matter what it is, whether it's your notes, your outlook on life, or a union, or a company, or a way of trading, takes on a life of its own where the most important aspect is survival. Now let's go back to these 4 big things that move more money than any country in the world. We have war. We have war to break things and to kill people. Then we have medicine to take those who are just wounded, patch them up and send them back in so they get another chance. We have insurance that's designed to take care of those that are lost in the war and to take care of those that they leave behind, the people who are growing the food and the corn and making the cannons. And then we have religion to take care of those who are in fact killed. So we have these 4 biggest money movers in the whole world, and the center of all 4 of them is survival of the most important organization you and I know of, and that's us. And we want to survive. There's a country song that I like a great deal that has a verse in it that everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, because we think of dying as a lack of surviving. Same thing is true in the markets. Bracketed markets go forever, it seems, and trends tend to go for further than we ever think they will. Remember back in the 80s when people were saying that the Dow might just get up to 3,600, and people were calling those prophets crazy. Now the Dow is approaching 3 times that much. And what do the people who called the top at 3,600, what are they doing? They now have redefined the market. So instead of saying I was wrong by saying it's going to top out at 3,600, they now say we're in a mania, and nobody can predict the end of a mania. It's because they organize their thoughts, and they would rather deny reality than to change their thoughts. And for us to want what the market wants, and for us to get in tune with the market, we have to relax our own personal organization. And what most traders do is, let's say, for example, you make $1,000 on Monday. Well, we quickly calculate, man, if I can do this every day, then Friday I'm going to have $5,000. We're trying to tell the market what to do. And the more I experience the market and the more experience I have in the market, the more I see that it's very similar to religion. And in religion, if you believe in God, then you don't question God. If God says it, that's good enough. And in the markets, in trading, to become a successful trader, you have to make that assumptive leap that the God is the market. At least in trading, the market is God. And that God that we call the mother market is going to tell us exactly what to do, and all we have to do is obey. We don't have to argue with it or anything. We just obey it. Let me give you another example. And we have something on the screen here for you here for that. This is the simplest organization I can possibly think of, and that is a hydrogen atom. Now, if you get below an atom, then you're in the subatomic world, and that's kind of crazy too, because there's some very interesting things about the subatomic world. Things don't behave properly. And one of the interesting aspects of theoretical physics is that every subatomic particle that has ever been discovered, every one that's ever been discovered, has been named at least 6 years before it was discovered. So do we really see reality, or do we see what we believe? In psychology, more and more research is pointing to we see what we believe. We don't believe what we see. So the hydrogen atom, there are trillions of those just bouncing around in the room that you're in right now. Trillions of them bouncing around this room that I'm in. And every time we take a breath, every time we inhale, we're inhaling millions of those hydrogen atoms. Now, every now and then, we also have, in this same environment, we also have a much larger atom called an oxygen atom. An oxygen atom is about 16 times larger than a hydrogen atom, and every now and then they will kind of bump into each other, or at least they will get in the gravitational field of each other. This gravitational field is chaos. It's new information. Let me give you another example. If you went down into my garage right now and got on my bicycle and started riding, you would probably be able to ride okay, and you'd go around the corner because you're organizing the incoming information from gravity. You know how much to lean or how much not to lean. Same thing is true with the atoms. When they get near each other, they become engrossed in each other's gravitational field, just like the universe does, just like the planets in the solar system. Now, this hydrogen atom is an organization, and it, like everything else, living and non-living, wants to keep its organization intact. So 99 and then put 5 nines behind that, 99.99999% of the time, this hydrogen atom says something that could be translated into human terms like, well, I'm a hydrogen atom, that's what I am, that's what I'm going to be, my granddaddy was a hydrogen atom, and our whole family were hydrogen atoms, and that's good enough for me. So what it does, it rejects the new incoming information from oxygen. It says, I was a hydrogen atom, I'm going to keep being a hydrogen atom, and you, oxygen molecule, you go ahead and do whatever you want. That happens 99, follow that by 0.9 points, 0.9s, and you have the percentage. Now, 0.00001% of the time, that hydrogen atom gives up. It says, well, let's let go and see what happens, and we'll just won't interfere with this, and we'll see how it turns out. How it turns out is it is a trans-ending experience. Now that's spelled TRANCE-ENDING. It ends the trance that it's a hydrogen atom. Now it becomes part of a much larger organization called H2O, or water. And think about it for a moment. Water has almost no characteristics that either hydrogen or oxygen has. It has transcended into a higher state of development, or a higher level of complexity. And that's exactly what the science of chaos is. What we call chaos really has an underlying structure. There is regularity in all irregularity. The same with the market. The market looks very chaotic. It looks like it's very irregular. But if you understand the underlying structure of that market, then it all makes sense. So this is the most important concept in the entire course. What do you do with new incoming information? We've already spent a good deal of time talking about how we organize it. What happens if you don't try to organize it? What happens if you take the chance that this hydrogen atom takes very, very rarely and let the new incoming information organize itself? Well, what happens is that you don't know what's going to happen, so it builds risk into this scenario. And this is what life is all about. Think about it for a moment. What makes life worth living? It's risk, isn't it? If you knew exactly how every minute of your day was going to turn out, if you knew that every trade you put on was going to make money, pretty soon you'd be bored. It's the novelty, the risk, the new incoming information that we don't know about that makes life worth living. Why do you think people want to retire and travel? Because they want new information. We're always seeking new information. That's what we seek in new partners, in marriage, in going together. We want this new information, but oftentimes we try to distort it into old categories. Remember I said last week, I mentioned that I'd gotten up and assumed that I was sleeping beside the same lady I went to bed with. And that's not a valid assumption, because I'm not the same person I was on the last tape that you saw, and you're not the same person either. So our question here, and our thing to contemplate today on this most important day, is what do we do with new information? And in the market, what we're going to do is we're going to use the science of chaos and let the new information organize itself. Now we're coming toward the end of this most important day, day 2, week 2. How do you organize new incoming information? Think about that for a moment. To let the new information organize itself, there are several things you have to do. First of all, you have to give up your preconceived ideas, and that's why we're spending so much time on it now before we get into the actual trading of the market, is to encourage you to give up the ideas you've had about trading, about what makes trading good and what makes trading bad. We'd like for you to quit looking for more information. We want you to look for good information. And remember from last week, good information is grounded assessments. And we're going to talk about that beginning next week. But now, let's review what we've done today. We let the new incoming information organize itself. For us to do this, there's one important characteristic that we must abide by. We must be totally in the here and now. We can't be thinking about what's happening tomorrow, what happened yesterday. We can't be munching over our losses yesterday or anticipating our profits for tomorrow. We have to be with the market immediately, right now, in the here and now. We have to give up our categories, and our categories are our life. When you meet somebody, you say, what is your name? That's your category. Where do you live? That's part of your category. What do you do for a living? All of that's trying to categorize people. So if you meet a person who says he's the president of General Motors, and you meet another person who says he's the janitor at the elementary school, most of us will react differently to these two people, because we react to our organizations, which is another word for our categories, which is still another word for our belief systems. And one of our assumptions, one of our main assumptions in trading, is that nobody trades the market. You don't, I don't, the people with the 3-story computers don't, the big pool operators don't. We all trade our belief systems. So if you're looking for a new technique, a new system to trade the market, it's not going to work. What you need is a new belief system. And that's the purpose of this entire project and this entire course and the 3-month home study course. So remember and think about this from day to day about new information. How do you react to things? Do you react to things because of your belief system, because of your history, or are you able to let it unfold right now in the here and now as a unique experience in life? Hopefully it's the latter. And tomorrow we're going to have another unique experience. We're going to go further into the science of chaos, the quantum soup, and how the magnets create things out of nothing. And remember to do your morning pages, your 2 ATs, and we'll see you tomorrow. Congratulations on getting through yesterday. Today won't be quite so heavy, but it's going to be just almost as important. Yesterday was the most important day. How do you handle new information? I don't even have to ask you about the morning pages or the AT, do I? We know you've already done them. If you haven't done them, your job is to stop and start all over again from day 1. Our goal today is to understand some of the differences between classical science and modern science. We said last week that classical science, we've been climbing this ladder of wisdom for 2,500 years now, only to find out that it's been leaning against the wrong building. Everything has changed. I used to teach in the School of Engineering thermodynamics, and we used to teach about the Newton's laws of motion, and for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Nothing goes faster than the speed of light. And now we know all of those things are in error. That we are now, as we said before, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We are living in interesting times. One of the assumptions, one of the erroneous assumptions that classical science used to make, and many classical scientists still make, is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So if you're a classical scientist and you want to make some stuff, What you have to do is get some other stuff to make it out of. You don't create something from nothing. Remember Aristotle's syllogism that something is either A or it's not A, and it can't be both A and not A at the same time. Well, quantum mechanics has pretty well destroyed all of that. Quantum mechanics can now create things where before we could just change energy, and we could create materials, but we had to use energy to do it. And what they do is they create this out of a thing called quantum soup. Now, the next 2 days, we're going to look at several what's called attractors. So if you can imagine that there's this vast quantum soup out there that you can't distinguish with any of the perceptive mechanisms we have, and if you take all of the perceptive mechanisms that we humans have, from ultralight to infrared with all the sound and the sight and everything else in that vibratory cycle, we now know that if you call that everything that we can perceive with our physical body, everything that you can perceive in any way is called an octave. We now know that there are at least 200 octaves that we can't perceive. So when we look out and we think we see reality, we're projecting. We're not really perceiving, but we're projecting what we think reality is. And as we said yesterday, we see what we believe. We don't believe what we see. So we need to look at the differences between creating something and solving a problem. Most classical science is devoted to solving problems. And today, for example, the politics of this country is trying to solve the deficit problem. The justice system is trying to solve the criminal problem. The medical system is trying to solve the disease problem. They'll never do it, because once you have a solved problem, you don't really have anything. There is inherent in psychology that as soon as you start to approach success, you tend to quit doing the very thing that made you successful in the first place. This happens to all of us traders. We want a new system, a new approach. I think I'll make this new trade, instead of going with something that we know will work, the unfolding behavior of the market. And remember that by letting the new incoming information organize itself, we're getting in tune with the unfolding behavior of the market, and we're ending the losing trance. From a psychological standpoint, one of the important questions we have to ask ourselves is what do we gain by losing? Remember last week I offered you the $10,000 check to go to Las Vegas and lose it for me, and you probably said you can do that. But when I asked you if you could go there and double it, you probably had some inclination that that might not be quite as easy as losing it. This is a belief system, and this is what we have to work with when we change our way of thinking. So it's important that we understand how the science of chaos and the new modern quantum scientists look at creating. When you solve a problem, you don't have anything. For example, here we live in the state of Texas. We're on a big campaign of trying to solve the criminal problem by building more jails. That will never work. Instead of creating a civilization where there's no need for crime, we're trying to punish the criminals. It just won't solve a problem that way. And if it does solve the problem by putting all the criminals in jail, that still won't work. The medical science is trying to solve the disease problem rather than creating a high level of wellness. And the government's trying to solve the deficit problem rather than creating a government where there is no deficit. What we want to do is create a trading approach, a systematic trading approach that will tap into the underlying structure that we talked about 2 days ago, and that will give us the insight of how the market's really working. And then if we stay in the present tense and let this new incoming information organize itself, then we won't have to protect our organization. We can be very mobile. We can go the way the market wants. The market will be our God in trading the market, and we'll do exactly what the market says. So tomorrow what we're going to do is look at these strange attractors. Now, this quantum soup that we're talking about, which is where everything apparently comes from, it has no dimension, it has no time, there's no way to perceive it with our bodily functions or with instruments that we can create, at least at this stage in science history. And it is a quantum soup that's out there. And it's almost, we're on the lakeside here. If we went out in a motorboat and we lost the motor, we would come back and we'd get a big magnet out of the garage, and we'd take it out there, put it on a rope, and go over the area where we thought that we dropped the motor. And if we hit it, then we could pull it out. So these attractors that are the underlying structure of our behavior, the market's behavior, the universe's behavior, are called attractors. They're like magnets. And that's what we're going to start looking at tomorrow, is how these magnets create a very different worldview. To review what we've talked about today very simply, and we want you to be reading in the manual and in the book and also in the workbook that you have. Your job today is to understand that there is a different way of approaching the world, whether you're using classical science or new modern science. There are different ways of approaching the market, whether you're using grounded assessments or ungrounded assessments, where you're using the unfolding behavior of the market or you're using historical trend analysis and technical analysis. And what we want to do is allow the incoming new information to organize itself. If we do, we don't have to worry about the future. And we'll find out the real truth that freedom is chaos and chaos is freedom. Make sure you do your morning pages and your twice-a-day AT. Have a good evening. We'll see you here tomorrow. Okay, here we are at week 2, day 4. What we've done this week is we've looked at the underlying structure of the market. We've looked at the chaos, the most important day of the whole course, that chaos is really just new information. And the key, the trance-ending key to get out of the trance that you're in, which may be a losing trader, is that you have to allow the new incoming information to organize itself. Remember last week we said the best description of the market we've ever heard is that there's a lot less here than meets the eye. So all of this kind of ties together. We can give up all of these old organizations that we thought were supporting our life, and all we have to do is live with chaos. Let the incoming information organize itself. Our goal today, in addition to doing the 3 morning pages and doing AT twice, and you should be getting that warm feeling by now, our goal today is to understand 2 of the 4 attractors. Now remember that these attractors are the underlying structure of whatever's going on, whatever kind of behavior, whether it's market behavior, training a dog, or whatever. These attractors will affect the behavior of whatever is using that attractor to create the new information. For example, the first and the most simple attractor is called a point attractor. And this is simply an approach avoidance kind of thing. For example, another example is that the first dimension of personality on a newborn baby is optimism-pessimism. It's either attracted toward food or it's repelled by dirty diapers. It's a back and forth. It's like a pendulum that goes back and forth. And what this attractor really controls is plant life. So you have the plant that grows up from a seed, and it sends roots down by gravity, and it sends leaves up by photosynthesis. So you have 2 magnets, one below and one above. Now one of the interesting things that chaos has pointed out is that if you have something that has symmetry, anytime you have symmetry, or the more symmetry you have, the less freedom of behavior you have. So if you want a great deal of freedom of behavior, then you have to have less symmetry. So this first attractor, the point attractor, creates symmetry. In plants, you have the roots, the stem, and the fruit, and the leaves. The second attractor, and remember that in this quantum soup there is no vibration, there's no time, there's no weight, preference of force, or any of that sort of thing. The first thing that happens in this quantum soup is something starts to vibrate. Now the instant that something moves in a vibratory cycle, it creates time. You cannot have time in total stillness. It just doesn't happen. You must have movement to create time. And in the science of chaos and nonlinear dynamics and fractal geometry, there's a thing called phase space. And a phase space is simply where you add another dimension. So if you have a vibration that's going up and down, and you add time to that, going from right to left here, then what you would create is sort of a sine wave, or a circle, or a cycle. And the circle-cycle attractor basically is the underlying structure and is the controlling factor for anything that in any way repeats itself. Let's take a few examples. The seasons, for example. Winter, summer, spring, and fall. They come very regularly. That's controlled by the circle-cycle attractor. When you get up in the morning, you feel better than when you went to bed. When you go to bed, you're more tired than when you got up this morning. That's the circle cycle attractor. When a dog puts on more hair in the winter and loses the hair in the summer, that's a circle cycle attractor. Any sort of circadian rhythm, when you get hungry and then you eat and then you're no longer hungry, all of these activities, the underlying structure for all of them come from this one attractor, and it's called the circle cycle attractor. Again, the reason we're using this is to give you a theoretical background for how we're going to be trading the market. So today we're looking at two of those attractors, and tomorrow we're going to look at two more attractors. We're going to look at what controls animals, and then we're going to look at what controls humans and what controls people in the market themselves. So today is a little short one on the video, but hopefully not short in your thinking. Think about this and think about and read the chapter in your book and in your manual, because this is the underlying structure. This is the philosophical basis upon which we're going to build our winning approach to trading. Reviewing once again, today we're looking at two of the four general attractors. We're looking at the point attractor, which is the simplest, controls the simplest behavior. Then we're looking at the circle cycle attractor, which controls seasonality and anything that goes in a circle or a cycle, like bull markets and bear markets and sideways markets. Those are all controlled by the circle cycle attractor. Then tomorrow we're going to put those together, and then next week we're going to start out with real trading. So have yourself a good evening. Think about everything we've talked about. It's very important that you think about these things when you're not looking at the video, and think about how they apply to your life. The purpose we're going to behind all of this is to end your trances. We want this to be a transcending experience. We'll see you tomorrow. Welcome back to the end of week 2, day 5, week 2. We've spent 2 long weeks now building up an underlying structure for our approach to the market. And I trust that you're not too bored, because next week we're going to get into the really exciting part, and we're going to be applying everything that we've talked about so far. And what we've talked about, what we spent yesterday on, was 2 attractors. These were the attractors that handle or create the underlying structure for plants, and the one that creates the underlying structure for circles and cycles and cyclical kind of behavior. And cyclical kind of behavior also has to do with the Elliott wave, with Gantt analysis, and with a lot of other formats. We're going to cut through all of that and go to the very simplest and keep it that way. Remember, there's a lot less here than meets the eye. So today let's talk about 2 things after you have written your 3 pages and done your twice daily AT tapes. And by now, your warmth and heaviness should be feeling very good. And as suggested on the AT tapes, if you ever have trouble going to sleep at night, just do the heaviness, let it go at that. That will end your trance of being awake. Today we want to look at 2 other attractors. The first one we want to look at is the torus attractor. And as you will see both in your notes, in the slides in your notes, and also on the video, the torus attractor is a little bit difficult to portray in 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. Basically, it's like a bagel or a donut, where the energy is running around and around the donut shape, and it's also running around itself inside the donut. So it's a very complex kind of a motion. And the torus attractor affects all animals. It's the underlying structure for animals. And we said yesterday that as you gain freedom, you have to lose symmetry to gain further degrees of freedom. So most animals, like a dog or a cat, they're somewhat symmetrical. For example, the front paws left and right are symmetrical, or approach that, and the back paws are. But from front to back, they're not symmetrical. Food goes in one end, it goes out the other end. But they have much more freedom than plants do, which are governed by the point attractor. Then we move up the ladder one more big step to human beings. And one way to do this is, and if you read about this in the research literature, this is called the third force. For example, if you have a point attractor, which is just a simple pendulum going back and forth, that has 2 forces. If you add another force, if you hit it in mid-cycle there, then it's going to go in a very chaotic fashion. And this controls human behavior. And because human behavior is more chaotic, which means it takes in much more new incoming information, they called it the strange attractor. Because when they were working on this and determining it, they classified human behavior as the strangest behavior in the universe, much stranger than planets or atoms or dogs or cats or plants. So it's called the strange attractor. And it's the strange attractor that explains the market and explains the workings of the market, also explains the workings of the people who are trading the market. Now, again, we're going to take all of these attractors, put them together in grounded assessments to make the market very simple. It's going to be so simple that once you learn it and know it well, you will be able to look at any chart of stocks, bonds, or commodities and be able to analyze the entire chart in 10 seconds or less to know exactly what you should do, where you should do it, where you should enter, where you should get out, when you should take profits in 10 seconds or less. The reason for this, as you'll find out next week, is that most markets don't go anywhere for 70 to 85% of their lifetime. So if you are looking at, say, 16 markets here, out of the 16 markets you're looking at, whether you're looking at futures or bonds or stocks, probably only 2 or 3 are going to be moving. So our approach is to analyze a lot of markets. When one of them sticks their head up, we go over and we put all of our assets over there, and we trade very aggressively there. Now, we've looked at the 4 attractors. We've looked at the underlying structure. Remember, there are 3 principles of underlying structure. First of all, that everything in the universe is energy. All energy follows the path of least resistance. This path of least resistance is determined by the always underlying, usually unseen structure, and that underlying unseen structure can be discovered and it can be altered. Then we went to the second day of this week, and on the second day of this week we looked at what chaos really is. And from now on, every time you hear the word chaos, you forget the word chaos and you put in its place new information. So the big question for this course and for your life and for your trading is, how do you handle new incoming information? You're going to be getting a lot of new incoming information in this material. I strongly suggest that you don't judge this information in any manner until you have become an expert at using it and seeing if it works for you or not. If you try to put this in and say, well, that's like technical analysis, or that looks like a stochastics or an RSI or whatever, you're missing the entire boat. This is new information. Chaos is not just an advancement of science, it's a totally new way of looking at the earth. And mankind will never be the same. Human beings will never be the same as a result of chaos. I think that the 20th century is going to be remembered by 3 important scientific developments. There's relativity in the early part of the century, there's quantum mechanics in the middle part of the century, and there's the science of chaos in the latter part of the century. And I'm absolutely convinced that the most successful traders in the 21st century will all be using the science of chaos rather than the other. But to do that, what we have to do is we have to end our trances. We have to, again, have a trans-ending experience by letting the new incoming information organize itself. And as a sort of a condiment for that, a sort of a salt and pepper on that, what we're going to experience is risk. And risk is going to be not something you avoid at all costs, but risk is what makes life worth living. Now, this weekend, we have a very, very important thing to do. We must, absolutely must make time to take our IT on a date. And when you take your IT on a date, when you come back, the next time you get into your morning pages, record what you did and do something out of the ordinary. Go places you've never been. Get on a bus. Get on a plane. Go someplace that you don't ordinarily go. Ride around town on different streets. Take a ride in a different car. Go out and spend the night in a motel or a hotel. Do something different. And as you're doing it, see if you can practice. And this is extremely, extremely important. Make sure that you begin to practice easing up on your categories, easing up on your belief systems, and letting the new incoming information organize itself. What it's going to be like is going to be like going from the old black and white round television screens into real life. You're going to see a richness, a variety, and excitement that you normally don't see. Make sure also that you keep up your 3 morning pages, and in your manual, in your study manual, at the end of this week, there's a number of questions and a number of projects. Make sure that you do those too. Then we'll come back next week for the 3rd week, and we're going to see our alligator. We're going to meet Professor Al E. Gator again, and we're going to see how we put these grounded assessments, these strange attractors, the science of chaos, into profitably trading the stocks, bonds, and commodity markets. Thank you. Congratulations on getting through the 2nd week I assure you it's going to get more and more exciting every week that we hear.